Welcome back, friends. There's a further issue I would like to discuss with you, that is in connection with South Asia and the war in Iran. So far, attention has been focused mainly on the war between United States and Iran, assisted by Israel, and also between United States and Russia through Ukraine. I want to now raise another interesting aspect to it, which is the role India has played in this geopolitical crisis. What is important, and I think we should begin here, is to look at how Pakistan has stolen a march on India by capturing the role of interlocutor or mediator, whichever you prefer to call him, as a mediator between United States and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other. This has come as a major shock to New Delhi, because New Delhi has believed, I think from the evidence so far, believed mistakenly that their, what they called strategic ambiguity in foreign policy was a winner. But what Pakistan's success in becoming the interlocutor has shown is the negative side of strategic ambiguity. As you know, strategic ambiguity basically means sitting on the fence in order to take advantage of every option that comes by. But it also has a negative aspect to it. That is to say, strategic ambiguity invites suspicion from all sides. And that, I believe, has been the reason why neither United States nor Iran were willing to trust India as a mediator. And this was again brought to the fore last month, around the same time that Pakistan became the interlocutor. Last month, the United States Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, visited Delhi and participated in the Raisina dialogue on the 5th of March. And he had something interesting to say, among other things, of course, something interesting to say as far as we are concerned. He issued a démarche to New Delhi, where he said that the United States will not allow, or rather, they said the United States will not make the mistake they made with China by allowing India to rise as an economic power, if not a military power. But then he didn't make a mistake. Not he, by Landau, I mean the administration in the United States did not make a mistake. In fact, the mistake he referred to goes back to the Clinton administration. Clinton administration invited China into the World Trade Organization and actually facilitated China's smooth entry. At that time, Western media lauded President Clinton for his farsightedness, for his generosity in bringing China into the World Trade Organization and thereby promoting peace, as they called it. But what Clinton had in mind, as far as peace is concerned, is that as long as China stayed in the World Trade Organization and its entrepreneurial class, the business class in China, took advantage of the market that they were able to access through the WTO, Clinton administration expected that those access and that chances to grow the business class would produce a capitalist class in China that would be strong enough to challenge the Communist Party of China, and therefore hopefully undo China's path, what Chinese call socialism with Chinese characteristics. What the Clinton administration, as with many others, did not understand is that China's economic model was not the same as the United States and would not move in the direction of the United States model, because Chinese model was state guided capitalism, not so much capitalism, state guided market economy, or rather more correctly, state regulated market economy, in which the capitalist class was kept out of any position where they could wield political power. The political power remains strictly and only within the Communist Party. And it is this structure that allowed China to promote market economy without at the same time undermining the Chinese model. In fact, China was able to use the market economy to boost and strengthen the Chinese model, or what they call the Chinese characteristics of a socialist model. In this statement that Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau made in India, what he implicitly told the New Delhi government is that the United States will not tolerate a challenge from India to US power. Now, India's Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, S. Jaishankar, did not directly address the United States. He simply said, India's rise will not depend on the mistakes others made. Here meaning, referring to Landau, saying that America made a mistake in allowing China to rise. And Jaishankar said, India's rise will be based on its own abilities and strengths. In this process, what has actually suffered is India's strategic ambiguity. It is no longer seen, at least from outside India, is no longer seen as a tool that will advance India's competitive edge in the geopolitical firmament. In fact, when Pakistan became the interlocutor, the best Jaishankar could say is that India is not a Dalal nation. Dalal here meaning a broker nation, which is trying to save face for the tremendous loss of prestige India suffered. To now proceed with this idea of strategic ambiguity, although it is dressed up as a geopolitical maneuver or geopolitical position, it is not really that sophisticated. What it really means is that it is the outcome of Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent Satyagraha strategy that he used against the British. And in that Satyagraha approach, Gandhi too did not take a strong position against British imperialism. He again created a slightly ambiguous position where, well, we actually do not agree with what you are doing, but we are not going to attack you. We merely are going to ask you to quit India. And so his Satyagraha culminated in the Quit India movement between 1940 and 1942, if I have got the dates correct. And this ambiguity is something the Indian elite inherited because they did not go through the experience of challenging the oppressor, challenging the enemy, which the Chinese Communist Party did very successfully. And therefore, the Chinese Communist Party's leadership is a product of a revolutionary experience, whereas India's leadership is the outcome of a wishy-washy, non-violent Satyagraha procedure, which did not produce a leadership that was forged in the crucible of the sword. And this has been a major difficulty for the Indian elite. Now, Satyagraha itself is not something very profound, although Gandhi and his supporters have or still do believe that it is a profound approach. The central meaning of Satyagraha is that the victim, that is the oppressed, is responsible to reform the oppressor, that the oppressed gains his or her freedom by changing the oppressor, by making the oppressor see how wrong they are in their actions. Now, this is not very different from that Walt Disney film many of you have seen, The Beauty and the Beast, where the beauty, who was at the receiving end of brutality, was expected to transform the beast and in that way escape the brutality. Now, this is the essence of Satyagraha, to transform the oppressor in order to escape the oppressor's violence and brutality. And there's an interesting episode, an exchange, shall we say, that brought out this skewed perspective of life. When Arundhati Roy defended the guerrillas who were battling to save their forests, a newspaper reporter had asked Arundhati Roy, why don't these guerrillas perform Satyagraha in order for them to, shall we say, liberate themselves, in order to stop the exploitation of the major companies that were devastating their forests? Arundhati's reply was, starving people cannot fast. And the point is that the fact that the media interviewer could have thought that Satyagraha was an efficient tool in order to change the policy of the state, which was bent on vandalizing the forest resources, is a pointer to the fact that this attitude still persists. The attitude here, I mean the need of the oppressed, or rather the responsibility of the oppressed to reform the oppressor. Now, this has resulted in an Indian leadership that is not strong enough to actually confront their geopolitical challenges. And the first, I would say, the early instance after independence was in New Delhi's dealings with China. At that time, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai were meeting in Delhi. He actually came to Delhi came to India to meet Nehru. And he made a very interesting point. He said, look, neither you or I was responsible for the border that was actually written by the British colonialists. So let us not take issue over that. Let us simply resolve the border issues. There are some sections that belong to us. There are some that belong to you. Let us now exchange and settle the border. But Nehru did not have, coming out of Satyagraha experience, did not have the psychological strength to actually stand up and say, fine, I'm ready to compromise, and here is what I need, and here is what you can take. Instead, Nehru hung on to the British colonial forward policy, where British colonialism, under the forward policy, started acquiring areas in the subcontinent, what they call the border areas, in order to stabilize British rule. And in my view, it is Nehru's inability to deal as an equal with Zhou Enlai. It was his inability to approach the situation as an equal, but rather from a misguided standpoint of a morally superior leader. Why morally superior? Because after all, Satyagraha and Gandhi's struggle was supposed to have been a superior moral position compared to, say, the violence that was carried out by Mao Zedong during the revolution. And it was this blindness, or this, shall I, not so much the arrogance, but so this blindness in not seeing the Indian position as untenable. And this is what I believe was the original reason for the inability of New Delhi to reach an agreement with China. And as Zhou Enlai had said, I referred to earlier, he said, we did not make these borders. So let's not hang on to them. Let's simply adjust them and carry on with our lives. And it is the fact that the Indian leadership has been repeatedly unable to cope with geopolitical challenges. In that situation, how does one look at the impact of Satyagraha and the Gandhian approach on Indian culture? It still has an impact because the Indian elite promotes the idea of non-violence. The reason they do it, of course, is to de-empower the people. By promoting the idea of non-violence, they deny the people the ability to actually strike back forcefully against oppressive actions of the state. And to me, this is a major handicap that the Indian elite faces today. Not only is it able to confront geopolitical challenges with a certain confidence of coming out of a revolutionary history, nor does it have the ability to deal with internal crises in a more rational way, in the sense of looking at the interests that are at stake and then reach certain compromises so that all sides are on a win-win situation. Instead, the Indian state is seeking to have a zero-sum game, and therefore they get all the victories and the rest lose everything. And as a parting shot, let me refer you to the experience of the Indian Army in Sri Lanka. In 1987, when the Indian Army sent what they call the peacekeeping force, everybody loves peace, as you know, they sent the so-called peacekeeping force in order to clear out the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. When they sent in the peacekeeping force, Rajiv Gandhi, coming directly from the non-violent Satyagraha and, shall we say, Ahimsa principles, Rajiv Gandhi made the fatal error that is from his point of view, the fatal error of telling the Sri Lankan president that he will remove the Indian army when the Sri Lankan government requests him to do so. Now, this is an example of lack of imperial resolve, because what New Delhi was doing by sending the military into Sri Lanka was actually extending its reach. It was a power projection by New Delhi into Sri Lanka under the pretext of controlling the so-called terrorism. Now, having attempted that imperial overreach, Rajiv Gandhi then wanted to maintain a pseudo-moral position and therefore told the Sri Lankan president, we will remove the troops as soon as the government requests us to remove them. Which of course happened in 1990 when President Premadasa ordered the Indian government to remove the Indian army. And because they had already said they would remove it on request, they were forced to withdraw. Now, this is just one more example of the lack of resolve in the Indian leadership. A lack of resolve which has its roots in Satyagraha, but would have been different if they had followed the example of Subhash Chandra Bose, who disagreed with Gandhi, that the struggle is not to reform the oppressor, the struggle is to revolutionary action to crush the oppressor. And so Subhash Chandra Bose had actually built up the Indian National Army, where he was in exile, and he marched with the Indian National Army into the northeast of India. And at that time, this is something everyone should reflect on. At that time, out of a 2.5 million strong British Indian army, there were only 40,000 British personnel. The rest were all Indians. Now, all that was required to win independence was for Gandhi and Nehru to call upon the Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army to drop their weapons, call upon them to refuse to obey orders by the British officers. Neither of them did that call. In fact, they ensured that the British army would remain solid and intact and was able to therefore crush Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army. Now, if both Gandhi and Nehru had called for the Indian soldiers to rebel, not so much rebel since they believed in non-violence, at least to refuse to take orders, which is a military variation of non-cooperation movement. If they had done that, there would have been no need for Satyagraha, no need for Ahimsa, no need for Quit India movement. The British Indian Army would have collapsed, British power would have been dissolved, and India would have got its independence much sooner. And it is this inability to see the wood for the trees, this inability to see that violence is structural, and it was actually facilitated by the British Indian Army, which was manned, whose vast majority of personnel were Indian. It was this inability to see it and therefore make this obvious strategic move of ordering the Indian soldiers not to obey the British officers. This is where both Gandhi and Nehru failed India and therefore were unable to generate a revolutionary leadership. Let's follow this up later in our next installment. And for the moment, goodbye. Please like and subscribe. Goodbye.